Well, I had no idea I was a movie star in literary clothing. What? You don't know what I mean? Then you didn't read the story notes at the end of the book. They are very illuminating, so I suggest you do so if you didn't. It will give you a grander perspective on this narrative. But I suppose I'm dead. Although, one is very immortal when you are a fictional character, no? Anyhow, Mr. Neville, I'm ready for my close-up.
Welcome to the final episode of the read-along of Adam Neville's The Vessel. This book, in my eyes, is a bit of a failed experiment, but I'll get into more of that when we get to the very end of this video when I talk about the story notes, because that definitely brings so much more to light. I respect him for what he did, however, it just didn't work for me personally. And that goes beyond the omniscient voice, which is a little clue, and if you have not read the story notes, you might want to pause the video, skim them, just so you get some context for what I'm talking about. However, I will definitely summarize it in the end. But there are some things that I did appreciate that he did here. I was thankful for even. So let us get into the book. We begin with chapter 28. And upon the kitchen counter, Jess's phone trills and grinds out vibrations again. And we see that Tony, bad Tony Tone, he is outside in his car, parked at the curb spelled K-E-R-B. Interesting. In America, we spell it C-U-R-B, but that's not the only word that we spell differently. But we note her disfigured lips. So as a long sigh escapes between her disfigured lips, she checks her watch and struggles to her feet and heads out into the kitchen. And then Izzy is there, coveting the gift from Tony, and she blanches with anger. She just pours salt into the wound when Izzy says, "'Cause he's angry, but not with me." We know that Mr. Tony has a history of violence, which definitely comes to a head, let's say, at the end of this book. But she starts asking her, "What does Flo say to you? What are you two always whispering about?" "Just things." "What things?" "About the garden, house. It don't make much sense." And then she asks her, "You remember anything from last night? The sleepwalking?" And Izzy shakes her head, but is fascinated with herself for some reason. "What did I do?" And then Jess asks her if she's seen her walk, but then Izzy responds with, "No, but I've seen her float." And she calls her Charlotte. All of this is coming together. We know all of this information. We know that Flo thinks that, or imagines that Izzy is her daughter. And now we are in Jess's dream, a dream heralded by the bony piping of a single distant note, a dream which two figures walk between the trees surrounding the grove towards the still black waters of the pond, a man and a child. And Izzy stands behind him smiling. She is once again dressed as Charlotte Gardner, and she holds the bloodied stump of the man's arm that is missing a hand. And Jess again finds herself secured with Flo's wheelchair, velcroed to it, as becomes a very common pattern with her dream sequences anyway. But Izzy and the blind, mutilated man wade into the shallows to join her. Slowly, Jess and the wheelchair are drawn back and into the deep water, which brings us to Jess waking up in bed, her head thrown back to complete the desperate inhalation that started in the dream in which she was being drowned. And she sees a form dressed in a pale gown, the small head tatty. I think that's my new favorite British word, tatty. And it is Flo. Jess screams, of course. But where the ghastly silhouette of Flo was just standing, she sees her daughter. Which brings us to chapter 29, and we meet Sheila, her boss. Her boss is alighting from her car, an eyebrow already raised. "Your daughter's not with you today." This is what's interesting to me. So at the end, we know Sheila's purpose. However, I'm not sure what this facade was for. Maybe you can let me know in the comments. Did I miss something? Did I read the rest of this book too quickly? But the way the characters kind of resolve, I liked it. I liked it. It was a bit of a twist, but some of the way the characters behaved didn't necessarily line up with what I thought they would be acting like, I guess. I don't know. Let me know if you have an explanation. Please illuminate me. And we learn that Sheila is here because of her attitude, Jess's attitude toward the client. Jess tries to defend herself, of course. She's trying to make it better for Flo. But then Sheila comes back with, "You bit my hand off when I told you about the salary for this position, but perhaps I need to rethink the posting." So Sheila is threatening her at this point, which again, I don't quite get toward the end. And Jess continues to try to tell her everything is wrong with Nerth's house. And then Sheila comes back with, "Starting with you working the night shift for the next week." Unfortunately, that is not what Jess wants, but it's what we need to end the story. And she ends with, "And for the love of God, don't touch Morag's bloody chicken." But then, as always, right, it seems like every time or most times that Jess is outside, across the road, she catches the eye of the elderly grandmother in a large sun hat, a woman she's seen out front several times, as we know, a neighbor who immediately dips her head to conceal her face beneath the brim of the hat. But here is something interesting, something I took note of, highlighted, in fact. So the elderly woman, she continues to trim the long, supple length of hawthorn, but around her feet, a range of gardening implements and a growing collection of sticks cut to various lengths are neatly laid upon a green plastic sheet for fear that the stooped figure is unaware of her. Jess clears your throat. And this is when we get some exposition. We get details about Flo's husband, the house, etc., etc. I was kind of disappointed with that. I was really hoping that Jess was going to discover things more on her own. Yes, she did find some things. Yes, she looked at the illustration, started putting two and two together, but it would have been nice to have her be more of an active protagonist in this and discover some things rather than this creepy lady who's always been out here. She just now decides to go talk to her and get this information. But anyway, she tells her Nerthus house remains under a shadow, even on a day as beautiful as this. You can see it. And down below, we learn about the village was considered sacred long before they showed up. A Roman general once wrote of Eadric, all wooded then, reaching in every direction for miles. He claimed it was holy to the ancient Britons, probably for millennia before the face washed ashore. And Flo's children found so much in the waters of the grove. Once a temple, you know, to a deity, where offerings were made. Little Lottie, beautiful child, a terrible business. Florence never survived the loss of little Lottie. She merely functioned, though we did what we could. As neighbors, friends, sisters, if you like, the woman bends and picks up another stick, and with her nimble hands begins to trim it of leaves and buds. But then the woman also tells her that when Florence first became ill, she told her that she considered dementia a blessing so that she could forget her pain. Because we know how terrible and evil her husband was, which is what I'm talking about when it comes to Tony. I think in a previous video, or maybe on the Discord in the channel, if you're not in the Discord, get your ass in there. I was hoping that her issues, right? Her issues in the present with her ex-husband, I don't know yet, boyfriend, whoever it is, as well as what's happening here, right? With the man with his junk cut off, was going to come to a head. Oh, terrible use there. But anyway, that's kind of what happened, right? I think that Jess's problems are definitely being mirrored or running in parallel, I guess, to the heart of the story here with the evil man who is Flo's husband. But then that brings us to chapter 30, and Flo is in her chair gazing out at the garden, just like always, no change there. But then Jess, she wipes the glass clear, and the withered black hand upon the shelf passes from the murk to clarity, from shadow to light, and glimmers like old leather. Newly appalled by what might not be a glove after all. Oh, yeah, big surprise there, right? That's another thing about this book. It feels like that things are very obvious, to a reader, but not obvious to the character. And it's kind of strange. I mean, I understand that, as an omniscient viewer to something like this, a film, in fact, we're a little bit more knowledgeable in terms of what's going on around them, right? So we'll see things that they don't see. And then Mr. Nevill here points out this oftentimes, if Jess looked behind her, or if Jess could see behind her, she would see old Flo skittering up the wall. But I think when it comes to these kinds of things, I don't know. Like, I'm reading words. The first thing that came to mind was a hand. I know I'm reading a horror novel. Jess does not know she's in a horror novel if she were a real person. So maybe that's why. I don't know. But there's a lot of stuff in this where you're like, I got it. I can see that's important. I can see that is going to be a story element of some kind. And that's one of my disappointments with this novel too. But anyway, let us move on to this next scene. And from the window of Flo's bedroom, Jess peers out at the garden to check on her client. But as ever, Flo gazes at the grove at the top of the garden, and the shimmer of the pond's black water is partially visible through the fringe of trees. And she takes a seat on Flo's bed with a sheaf of papers and browses until she finds a wallet containing a marriage certificate for Florence Harriet Gardner and Algernon Wilfrid Gardner, the evil man. See also birth certificates, two of them, one for Charlotte Isadora Gardner. and Philip Arthur Gardner. And then beneath the birth certificate lies a death certificate. Jess pulls it free and reads the scant details of Algernon Gardner's demise. A civil registry document accompanies a certificate and declares the man dead after being missing for 7 years, dated 1980. And this is the mutilated man who has appeared in her dreams, so now we know who it is. It's Mr. Algernon. He is the evil man in the dreams, missing his junk, ending up in this vessel, I guess. But then Jess finds something else. This one is made from card and secured by a red ribbon. Jess retakes her seat on the bed and unties the bow. And here's like a little aside. Here's a very cinematic aside. Outside, an absolute silence thickens about Flo in her wheelchair upon the lawn. And as if wary of being observed from on high, she turns her head to face the vicarage, and her eyes fix upon the bedroom window. She's looking at Jess, or in her direction. But then, from inside the card folder, Jess removes the second death certificate. The words swim, and she has to read them 3 times to make sense of what she is looking at. Charlotte Gardner, age 12, died in 1973. The cause of death is listed as accidental. Oh, Flo, you poor love. So we learned of what, the quote-unquote accidental death is at the end, which, yeah, I'm sure it was accidental. But a child's hand-drawn picture, birthday card sent from a little girl to her mother, a comfort muslin, her milk teeth in an envelope, but then also a court protection document. The name of deputy with lasting power of attorney for Flo is highlighted. Philip Arthur, Flo's son's address is also cited. Oh man, but he lives in France. Your little boy, of course. And Jess looks up at a framed black and white picture of young Philip on the bureau, solemn and awkward always, his eyes troubled. But all these are addressed to Philip Gardner at various addresses spanning decades. All have been returned to sender, no longer at this address. But Jess goes out to check on her client, still gazing at the garden. She checks her little SOS tracking handset to make certain that Flo hasn't moved, then pulls the front door closed with the catch lid on. There's a distant snick of secateurs from across the road where the top of the elderly neighbor's sun hat remains visible. Jess takes a deep breath and ambles over to the lane, the opposing hedgerow. Sorry, me again. Of course, because we need more information. And the gardener stretches upright without a groan. Without a groan? Interesting. But Flo had a son too. She's giving her this information. And Philip, he was at boarding school when his dear sister was lost. And then she asks about the husband. Did he pass away? Not precisely. He left them and couldn't be traced. Flo had no choice but to declare him dead. He was a charmer, old Algie, but cruel, a controlling man, hateful to dear Flo, and a brute to his daughter. But how did little Charlotte die, she asks. Swallowed a great deal of her mother's medication. Suicide? Accident? Inconceivable that a young girl from such a good family would take her own life. And the neighbor watches her return to the vicarage, no matter how difficult she is to manage, even if she forgets herself and what she's doing. The past is always with her. Which brings us to 31, and Jess stiffens. When the call is answered, she stops chewing her bottom lip. Philip? Is that Philip Gardner? So she is talking to our buddy Philip. He's not fond of talking about his mummy either. And we also see that the motion detecting handset synchronized to Flo's necklace beeps an alarm. What came to her, what she became, you simply have no idea. And Jess doesn't follow. I'm sorry, Mr. Gardner, I don't follow. And just ferrets the device out of her pocket and winces as she confirms that Flo is on the move. Where is she levitating to now? And had anyone been observing Flo in the garden, this is what I was talking about earlier with the cinematic or the omniscient voice, that small figure dressed in a robe, there could be no mistake that the elderly woman just stood up before her wheelchair in one smooth and soundless maneuver. Well, that's an interesting spelling. So, yeah, I don't know about these little things. I feel like he's really leaning into the film-like nature of his writing toward the end of the book. He was doing it a little bit, like in the beginning, and there was a beautiful bookend. I will definitely give him credit for that, with the bird flying from the garden or from the grove to Jess's house, and we end with the bird, as you know. But some of these just kind of, I don't know, it felt like trying too hard. It felt too jarring. It felt like he was too lost in screenwriting land, and I'll talk about that more at the end. But then we're inside the kitchen. The bird cries grow to the sound of a flock in panic, and Jess makes her way to the door. The birds again. And if you're half observant as you appear, then you'll know about the grove. And within the cacophony of enraged birds, Flo turns slowly upon the lawn, and her arms are stretched out from her sides, her palms uppermost. She completes the circle. Her red robe sways. And she keeps rising. But still on the phone call, you mustn't tell her where I am. Jess tips her head. Her eyes implore the garden to reveal her client. All of them around her. They change her. My father was never found. The girl, they got rid of him. Please don't call me again. So he's definitely fears all of these women who, we learn about later. And two thin legs jutting beneath the hem of Flo's red dressing gown in the upper part of the door frame. They hang empty hair. They hang in empty air outside above the lawn. Distant trees in the glade are clearly visible below the slippered feet. It just pulls up. Christ! The body of Flo abruptly drops from the air. Some of this, honestly, is a little bit comedic. I don't know if it's the way he wrote it or if it is the way just the scene is, but I kind of found myself chuckling inside my head a little bit while I was reading about Flo floating and rising and crawling up buildings and et cetera, et cetera. But within her inert hand lies upon the grass. Flo's eyes open, and before Jess is able to raise the phone, the old woman darts forward from the waist as quick as a snake to seize Jess's wrist and hold it fast between her jaws. This is fucking hilarious right now. So I just picture this old lady biting her hand, and then she starts dragging her, right? Isn't that right? Shit, Jess drops the phone and tries to pull her arm free, but Flo doesn't relent, and as Jess's arms moves, Flo's scrawny body bumps across the grass, attached to her by the mouth. That's hilarious, man. This is like cartoon stuff right here. But then Jess, she almost punches her, right? Tit for tat, eye for an eye. But no, instead she picks her up, puts her into the wheelchair, and takes her arm free of Flo's moist jaws. But snapping from her shock, Jess tugs the Velcro restraints around her client's emaciated ankles and wrists. And Penny, little Penny, she's calling. Which brings us to chapter 32. And Penny rolls a push chair through the school gates with two Foundation children walking beside her, each enraptured by the ice lollies. Izzy drifts at the back of the group, staring at the bone artifact the Flo gave her, while her lolly melts over her hand. And Tony's here! This is when Tony shows up, and he's like, hey, this is my kid. I love this line right here. So Penny's like, hey, no. Did she not tell you I'm having her after school? And he counters with, just forget to tell you I'm her father. Ooh, Tony burns. But anyway, what happens is he just takes her, and that's that. But this is kind of funny too. This description kind of kills me. I know what he was going for, but the picture in my head when I read this it killed me. Tony turns to Penny, moves fast like a bantamweight boxer, light on his toes, and for a moment his grin twists into a nasty sneer, and he pushes his forehead far too close to Penny's now fearful face, which he does later with Flo. As their noses almost touch, his hands fist briefly before he dances away and offers a high five to Izzy. Come on, kid. I don't know. Did you guys picture that in a really weird way? I picture this guy like just dancing around going ooga booga and like getting really close to her, and there's nothing scary about that. It's just kind of ridiculous, but maybe it's just me. Let's talk about chapter 33. Shaking from shock after the attack amidst the cacophony of the bird cries, Jess maneuvers the wheelchair inside the living room and swipes open the incoming call on her phone. And they're talking about Tony, of course, but then Jess's SOS handset beeps. Her client is on the move again. This is turning into an Adam Sandler movie. Creepy old lady floating around. She's on the move. Maybe it's the way he describes her calling or saying that she's on the move. But in response, her client's brittle voice travels from the distance. Erica. We know what that means. And she's seen this place before, but only in her dreams. She is chasing her through the grove into the surrounding wood. But then she makes it her way to a pond, and bubbles pop in the center of the onyx water, the gentle disturbance sending circles to the surrounding edge. The outermost ripples guides just attention to the second slipper, waterlogged but still bobbing in a bed of reeds. Oh yeah, this is when she finds the vessel, the hawthorn bird cage kind of thing with the dude in it, right? The surface rises further, tightening her chest and making her gasp for breath. As she stumbles deeper, her body disappearing below the waist. No. But Jess, she plows on, the water rising to her chest. Swishing her arms through the water in the middle, she rakes the lightless depths with her fingers and drags the darkness, seeking the body of her client. But her fingers grasping what resembles a long pale object, perhaps a bony forearm. The limb seized, she hauls it free to the surface. Dead wood. And an old stained garment is entwined around the blanched tree branch. Interesting. An intricately woven cage created from sticks and twigs blackened yet preserved by the peaty water. And she keeps hauling this up, of course, as she recognized the object to be similar to the effigy in the woodcut on the wall of the vicarage's first floor landing. But purpose-built, this is some kind of vessel or trap shaped like a beehive. About the ghastly container, rotting clothes are entwined. The quills of long decomposed bird feathers spike. We know bird feathers. We know hawthorn. We don't know beehives, but we've seen drawings of these things, I guess. A twig wheel is fixed to the foot of the basket. A withered human hand, oh no, cut roughly from an arm, has been spiked into the hub of the spoked wheel, and also a skeletal foot. Round and woven within the interior of the strange twig ball, more human remains become visible, like a grub or black larva inside. The imprisoning chrysalis of woman sticks hangs the tortured statement of what was once a man, with its genitals removed. Algae! This can't be algae, is it? It's algae, guys. It's algae. So what threw me off here was scale. So she found algae in this cage. But the way it was described, it was like it was tiny. Did I miss something where she was talking about it being a giant object? But for whatever reason, I pictured it like this tiny little man, this tiny little dead man in this. Maybe it was describing it like a what was it, like a beehive? Beehive. Yeah, I think it was. She described it as beehive shaped, so I think I immediately think small, and so I pictured a little man in here. So I guess I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Let me know in the comments if you saw a tiny little man in a beehive cage. But then she hears a distant bony piping. The woodwind music that she's heard before in her nightmares, or these noises purely within her mind. She can see no birds, no piper, and she claps her hands to the side of her head to try to kill her hearing. But her hands fail to smother the sound of a little girl sobbing among the distant trees, cries that follow the lonesome notes of the pipe. And from the distance, the doorbell of the vicarage chimes and resonates through the stills like a church bell. Golden shafts of sunlight carve the air, and amidst the tangle of vines, weeds, and nettles, the skeleton of a rotten wooden cart becomes visible, decomposing and returning to nature. So this thing was the real deal. And of course, we see Izzy outside wearing her school uniform and cartwheeling perfectly but inexplicably. Cartwheeling like a trained gymnast, just like she's done. She's done all these cool handstands and cartwheels in the past. And Jess tells her, no, hang on, wait here, I'll be right back. And Jess approaches the open French doors, through which a tale of her ex-husband's tawdry exploits continues to unfold. Assault and battery, 4 years in the nick, 4 years of her I missed, too long. That's a cool way of keeping it succinct without being too long. But Tony is there. Tone. This is when he, bad things happen to Tony. But he's sitting in the armchair, a rucksack in his lap, one hand rests protectively on the bag and fingers the zipper. What is in the rucksack? But from the wheelchair, Flo chimes in and matter-of-factly states, he has to go. We know where he has to go. But he's still arguing, this is what you want, Jess. Changing some old retard's nappies, working all hours to scrape enough together to take the little girl away from her dad. What kind of mother are you? And then Flo just smiles sweetly. He has to go. And she just continues with that over and over. Tony doesn't like it. Tony is up. He leaps in the wheelchair and pushes his face into Flo's. Shut it. I guess this is an adult channel. I can say cunt. So he's not really happy about her. But Tony, he just keeps pushing on, and look what he's got. When he unclutches his fist and dips his hand inside the bag and withdraws the length of a colored cord and a knife, if I ain't having her, you ain't either. There's another way for us to be together. Little melodramatic tone, but, this is a horror novel, I guess. But Jess is on her feet, running away from the room, but Flo's freed hands draw a bigger circle anti-clockwise. So she's doing her magic-y stuff. And above Tony's head, the new light bulb implodes. And so she's casting her magic to pop these bulbs to distract Tony and crack a stand of old boxes near the mouth of the tunnel collapse against Tony's head. Oh, man. And then Tone, no, we can't be together in the new place. It's for us, all of us, real family home. Yeah, right. We know what Jess is up to. But against the sun-bright French windows and within the rectangle of celestial light, Flo hovers in midair. Flying Flo. And above the wheelchair, an aged woman levitates, head tilted back like a baby bird, about to receive something between its stretched jaws. Flo's mouth in a black hole. Her throat moves as if gulping at the air. I like that image, the gulping at the air. Some of his descriptions are a little weird, like a baby bird about to receive something. There's nothing creepy about that. I don't know. I'm thinking about a baby bird in this context, not creepy. But when Flo speaks, it is Tony's voice that breaks from her withered mouth. He broke your teeth, bitch. Oh, man. Flo's, she is power level whatever. I'm not a Dragon Ball Z fan, but she's high powered right now. A mother cornered, a child threatened, just twists around, and the speed of movement startling, unleashing a primal and human shriek. She whips the poker into Tony's head hard. Flesh and bone absorb the impact, producing a sickening thud. This is when things get very gory, folks. And again, this blackened and dreadful mother swings the poker, and again, and again, and again. And her facial expression and her eyes do not alter. Red suds fly from the poker and decorate the white ceiling. Very, very gory. Each thwack from inside the vicarage, as Izzy's mother smashes apart her father's head as if it's a melon. And yeah, poor little Izzy. She's out in the garden she's out in the grove doing somersaults. Where's Daddy? I'm out here being an acrobat. I don't know why I talked in Flo's voice. But Flo has returned to her carriage as if she'd never left it. But she is too spent, old and depleted and near extinguished by her own exertions. Her head has fallen across her chest, her arms and legs hang lifelessly, and just sways to her client and drops. She is exhausted. And then finally, Jess says but doesn't know how to finish the thought. She points instead at the window and in the direction of the grove and those distant columns of trees crowning the garden. That thing up there in the sticks, your husband, you did that. And all of our questions are answered. But a startling moment of clarity surfaced in Flo's expression, and her eyes moistened. My little birds have flown, Jessica. And scrape comes the sound of a key thrust into the front door. And who is it? It used to be Scrape. Now it's a Scrick. I think it's Morag, right? Yeah, Morag. Morag shows up because Tony has been destroyed. It is time for him to be fed to this burrow in the living room, right? She's going to take him in there and giggle around. But Morag ambles and slashes in the living room. You can see how this, I don't know, man, the end of this book kind of really struck me funny. I know it's supposed to be a horror novel, but I don't know. I think part of it is the way he wrote it, like the actual prose, but some of it is the actions, I think. I don't know. But anyway, about bleeding time, you ask me. So Jess is like, wait, I just totally smashed my husband's head like a melon, and you're cool with it? But she drops her bags, wasting no time. She seizes Tony's lifeless ankles and drags his inert out into the living room, into this thing, right? So Morag ducks down, crawls backward into the dark aperture of the tomb within the room. The tomb within the room. That sounds like a cool kid's book. I'm going to write it, folks. You heard it first. The tomb within this room, or the tomb within the room, until her body disappears entirely. Her two fleshy arms then thrust out and seize Tony's ankles, and once his remains are entirely ensconced inside the tunnel, Morag chuckles to herself. Okay, so I guess all of this coven of ladies are just here to, I guess, sacrifice evil men to a goddess. I don't know. I guess that's what's happening. And Jess barks up the meager contents of her stomach. She can't handle it anymore. She hurls. But then we see, bathed by the sun's radiance, a group of elderly women stand at the foot of the front path. Flo's neighbors, the Constant Gardener, that's a movie, wearing the sun hat, the two dog walkers, the two other, good movie, by the way, the two elderly ladies that Jess glimpsed behind dim windows. They're so proud of her. They all sweetly beam at Jess, parked behind their backs and on her man, I can't talk tonight. Parked behind their backs in her boss's car. She's so proud of Jess, so happy for her. But the eyes of the elder neighbors who spoke to Jess are shielded once more by the wide brim of a sun hat, but the lower half of her face is broken by a broad smile. Yeah, these ladies, I get it. They got very white teeth. But in one hand, she holds a polished, short-handled scythe. And we know what's going on with the scythe. We've seen the scythe. We've seen it in the illustration, in real life. Now she's got it. She's ready. So they all mark the air with a closing circle at the same time. More witchy stuff. Then they cross the circles with spokes. Upon it, the hump of a spherical man-sized creel. Creel. I don't know why I want to say that with Scottish accent. Constructed from hawthorn sticks. It's all coming together, folks. But Blossom's going to sleep beautifully now. Better than she's known in a very long time. And finally, Izzy shows up. Hey, where's Dad? And this is a funny little joke here. I see what you did, Nevill. He had to go. He had to go, Flo whispers. So that would have if this would have been a movie, I'm sure that would have got a chuckle in the movie theater. But then Morag moves to Flo and takes Flo's free hand. They look deeply in each other's eyes. Flo nods, and Morag turns to Jess, her eyes shining. Jess, take Flo to her room. Which brings us to chapter 35. We're almost there, folks. And the 5 elderly neighbors stand with Sheila and Morag beneath the stained glass fanlight. Their heads are bowed as if before a queen. Queen Flo, a shrunken, near lifeless figure that Jess carries in her arms like a child to the foot of the stairs, and she takes her up there. Their work is about to begin. Jess and Izzy lie on their bed on either side of Flo. Izzy, her face tear-stained, sniffles. Flo and Jess each hold one of Izzy's little hands. But then old Flo, she dies. She dies. Her client has passed away. Jess swallows and places Flo's hand alongside her body. Oh, yeah, I think they were laying next to each other, right? That's pretty creepy. She's gone. Blossom said it was going to be soon. She only hung on for you. Okay, what does this mean? What does all of this mean? Readers, you're reading with me. I hope you're reading with me. If you're just watching this, maybe you don't know. Maybe you can help me because I think I'm going into a lot of detail. So, Jess gets this job. This woman bites her, smacks her, slaps her, all kinds of stuff. Seemingly hates her. So does everybody. Everybody's given a hard time. Sheila, Morag, and it was all to sacrifice her abusive husband to this goddess, right? And Flo hung on, right? She said her birds flew away, meaning I guess her kids. I don't understand. Help me understand this part. And so everybody was mean to her and giving her shit and making her life terrible. And then now everybody likes her because she like took things into her own hands, I guess, and killed her husband. I guess that's the only explanation. But then why was everybody being so mean to her? Was it to rile her up? Was it to make her angry? Was it to beat her into to be somebody who could fight back? Maybe that's it. I'm kind of thinking aloud here, so that kind of makes sense. Maybe I missed something in the text as well that explained that. If so, you know where to tell me in the comments. So Sheila had a small group of elderly figures, their arms and clothing stained. Oh, that's right. Sheila's part of it. Everybody's a part of this. The old ladies across the street, Morag, the lady who just loves her chicken, and Sheila, the boss. They're all in on it. Their arms and clothing stained blood red like butchers. The tree-lined edge of the grove unsteadily. 4 of them push the large wheelbarrow. Oh, man, it's all coming together, everybody. But deeper inside, beside the water, it resembles the tall trunk of a slender black tree suddenly moves itself in absolute silence. A long, though vague form with a narrow-beaked head. It passes through the far-off boughs and vanishes. I love that. So one thing I love about horror is when you don't show the monster. So I saw actually his film, The Ritual. I didn't know it was based on something. I didn't even know who Nevill was back then. But I've seen the movie, and my biggest problem with that film, I loved it up until the end, and it was just like showing too much, and it just kind of fell apart. This is cool. I think in horror, this is how it needs to be. Just a suggestion of something, right? I'm glad the monster wasn't completely shown, this creepy thing that we saw, this slender man, slender woman thing in the illustration. I'm so glad they didn't give it, they said it has a narrow beaked head, and it just kind of passes through and vanishes into the darkness. That's what you do. Thank you, Nevill. So Mother Goddess, they're still in some places, groves, that one. Morag then nods her world-weary head to Jess. Looks like Wee's out of a job. Come on, let's call ambulance for Blossom. But it ends so sweetly in chapter 36. So months later, Izzy is playing on the grass of the vicarage lawn again. She's positioning a new collection of big-eyed soft toys that she coveted in the supermarket. They form a ring about the cat toy her father gave her. And then she's hanging out with this little friend. How long are you staying? Izzy's little friend asks her. Oh, we live here now. Flo gives the house to your nana, and she gives it to us. Well, there you go. What a beautiful, happy ending we have here. even though Jess, I don't know how I feel about this. I mean, I guess Tony deserved it. He was an asshole. He was going to kill them all. He was a pretty fucked up dude. But Jess, I don't know. She went pretty far. A bird alights from the yew tree beside the group and bursts into the air. The vicarage in the garden grows smaller. This is the bookend, everybody. I enjoy this part. I love this part. As the bird, you guys know how I love a full circle. We're talking about witchy circles and stuff here and story circles. Not Dan Harmon's, as the bird flies higher, the earth takes on the shape of a new pattern and eye. In the center of a bushy copse. I used to think that was copse, right? Doesn't it like copse to you? Of trees resembling a rough green iris, the tiny black pond of the grove becomes a pupil staring into the sky, and from out of the fringe of the greenery, that is the grove, the faint lines of the ancient green paths form spokes that pass in straight lines from the pond. They reach beyond the boundary of the vicarage and a thread between the tiny building Edric. I know I said that wrong because I know, Mats, you told me how to say that, and I should have looked it up. From so far up, the pond and the protective grove become the tiny dark hub of the vast spoked wheel that reaches beyond the outer buildings of the village. This is a little too grandiose, but whatever. And if there's a wheel rim, it is visible in that ancient track and earthwork so far below, encircling and protecting the old settlement, the same shape as the twig wheels found within the vicarage shrines, the same shape as the stained glass fanlight above the front door of Nerthus house, an old wheel, and a wheel that extends very, very far. So let's talk about story notes, because this puts the entire thing into context. Mats, I know you're watching this because you watch all my videos, right? When you finish the book, you'll watch this. But anyway, so we know that this is a great story notes. If you guys don't read this stuff, you should totally do it, because not only does it give you context about this story and why it was written the way it was, but it talks about screenwriting processes and stuff. And I think that's pretty cool because Neville's had like a lot of great success with film. He hasn't had a lot of films made. I think he's had 2, right? Mats, you'll correct me on that as well in the comments, I'm sure. But regardless, that's pretty damn cool to have some of your books. I think he's only written 10 books too, and have 2 of them be made into films. And so he took his hand to screenwriting. He's like, I want to learn this. I want to, writing a novel is very different. And what this experiment created, or this dabbling created, was this experiment, The Vessel, what we read right here. And it was cool because I always love it when writers experiment, even if it doesn't work, right? Jeff Vandermeer, I read Dead Astronauts, was a very experimental novel. It kind of worked for me. It kind of didn't. It was really hard to read. Also, House of Leaves is a highly experimental novel with its typography, with its stories within stories within stories. But what Mr. Nevill here did is he wanted to say, well, what if I take a book and write it like a film, right? Write it in the omniscient voice, which is not an uncommon voice in fiction. Cormac McCarthy is one person who writes in that voice. However, I think he does it far better. For whatever reason, when Cormac McCarthy writes omniscient, I still feel for the characters, right? I don't know if it's because the way he wrote it here was obviously cameras, right? It was like some of these descriptions to me felt like what you'd read in a script, like with some direction of what's visually happening. So it's really far removed from prose, whereas McCarthy keeps it prose-like, even though he's omniscient, even though you never really technically get in the head of the character. You can in omniscient, by the way. Omniscient doesn't mean that you never get into a character's head. Omniscient just means that you can be in everybody's head, and it doesn't matter. Dune is written that way. I didn't like Dune because of that. When you learn everybody's motivations, hear their innermost thoughts, tension drops. I don't feel like that was here. He does mention that she, in films, the only time you ever normally, unless you're doing voiceover, the only time you ever normally hear a character's thoughts is brief moments, flashbacks, I think he says in here. And we do remember that at the very beginning, or toward the beginning of the novel, that Jess, she had these italicized thoughts about, teeth in a sink and et cetera, basically the violence of Tony. And so he really practiced what he preached in terms of creating this experiment. He was very consistent, although I feel he was inconsistent in a way. Toward the end, I think it was probably in episode 2, I started to really notice him leaning into this cinematic writing. So obviously it opens that way with the bird going from the grove to Nerthus house to Jess's apartment. But then we're omniscient the entire time, but we don't really take advantage of that voice in a cinematic way, a film-like way, very much until maybe about halfway and beyond that, where we literally have these asides of scenes. It kind of reminded me of Gardens of the Moon a little bit, the way it was done, where it's like, oh well, if Jess wouldn't be in the house, she would see Flo floating in the air, like with her gown, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a little too heavy-handed for me. I'll talk about this in the review a little bit too, but and I'll probably try to be a little more concise than I'm very rambly in these videos. Film and literature are two very different mediums. They both have their strengths. They both have their weaknesses. What I felt like Nevill did here is he took the weaknesses of film, right? Because you can't get inside the character's head, but he also removed the strengths of writing. So he wasn't omniscient, but he wasn't in a good omniscient. I know I'm not explaining myself very well here, but like I said, there's a lot of books that are written omniscient and they still feel like books. They still feel like you're reading. They still have the strengths of prose because you're very limited in film, but you're also, there's plenty of benefits in film, right? You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. You can actually show things, right, visually, exactly how you want them. You don't have to rely on the reader to picture them, and hopefully your words are conveying the images that you want them to see. But it also felt to me like this novel was a screenwriter. The screenwriter who had never written a novel, a short story, or anything, tried to write a book. That's what this reminds me of. It also reminds me of something that Shane Carruth, if you don't know who Shane Carruth is, he's still around. Well, he's no longer in the film scene, but he did Primer, which was a massive breakout success in 2000. Man, I don't remember the year, but it was at the Cannes Film Festival. No, Sundance. It won like the Grand Jury Prize, and then he came back years later and did Upstream Color. Both great films. The dude's pretty damn weird though. But what he said, I know, see how rambly I'm in these? Jesus. But anyway, so what he did was he said that when he was first getting into storytelling, he started writing a novel, and then he realized that what he was writing in the novel was just description and action. It wasn't thoughts or anything like that, like you normally see in fiction. Not to say you have to have direct thoughts. But anyway, and so he decided, he's like, I'm writing a movie. Why am I doing this? It kind of reminds me of that. I would love to read a novel written by Shane Carruth to see like if it feels like The Vessel. I don't know. But that said, I do respect what Nevill did here. I think it's great when people try new things. And he even says in the story notes, and he's like, I don't even know if this worked. I don't even know if it's any good. To me, there are some things that worked with it. There's some things that didn't work with it. I will definitely consolidate on that in my review. But yeah, let me know what you think. Did you enjoy the omniscient voice in the way that it was not just omniscient in a literary style, but omniscient in as if it's a script, as if it's descriptions with dialogue? And that's again why I think it's so short, because he didn't have all of these introspective scenes that you would have normally in fiction. Not that you have to, but it's pretty common. I don't know. I guess to me, this didn't work for me personally, but I know I keep repeating myself. I respect what he did. I think art is about experimentation. It doesn't always work. I've experimented sometimes. It doesn't always work, but that's the only way you learn and you grow, and you maybe find that you're on the wrong path and you discover a right path. So hats off to you, Nevill. I appreciate the effort. I did enjoy the story. I did enjoy for what it was. It's not necessarily my cup of tea in terms of, I wonder what this would be like if it were written as a novel. I feel like it'd be a little bit more successful with some more novel-like prose, literature-like prose. What this makes me want to do is read another book. I actually have The Cunning Folk. I bought it a while back just because I thought the cover was cool. That's the only reason. But I'm going to read more of Nevill. So keep an eye out for some reviews on his work. I'll try at least one more novel, because he does talk about how he does get into literary mode when he writes. And I like I said, I've never read anything else. So I'm curious to see. Now I know what Neville's idea of a film as a book. I want to see what his idea of what a book as a book is. As always, I would love to hear your comments, your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. It's time for a new read along, everybody. So I'll be gathering this stuff together, these titles together. I think I only have 2 in the Discord right now. Put up a vote, make a video, and we'll just keep this thing trucking. We'll keep it trucking. I apologize for how rambling this video became, but I don't know. Sometimes I think these videos are just, hey, me and you, we're just hanging out. We're just talking about books. We're laughing about stuff. We're learning stuff. We're crying together as well. And so I guess it's an okay format. I don't know. You tell me. Do you hate this? Do you want me to tighten it up a little bit? Or do you like this? I don't know. Whatever the hell this is. But anyway, thank you as always for hanging out with me. Thank you for reading along with me. And I can't wait to continue to read along with you. So until next time, have a great one.